So I'm gonna go through this PowerPoint slides that you got. It might be easier for the people in the room to use printout versus kind of screen. Gonna review. Oh, I'm Jared Isom. I'm with the Tax Policy Research Division here from Redmond. And I'm gonna just review some of the implications of changing the income requirements from the $1,500 it is now to different flat rates and also some per acre measures too. So, ready to go to the next slide, Bryce? Or still gonna hold up real quick? Perfect. All right.
Hold on. Sure.
Okay, awesome. So a quick review, when we value agricultural parcels, we estimate a gross income, and from that, a net income, and we capitalize that to get a value. So the estimated gross income that we use to value property is what I'm gonna be using in these estimates to compare it to the income requirements that we have, right? So to get the estimated gross income, it's just the productivity of the parcel times the statewide commodity price. And the commodities that we use vary depending on the use of the land. So for grazing land, we use animal unit months, irrigated and wild hay land, we use alfalfa, and summer fallow, continuously crop, and specialty crop land. Extremely are the commodities that we use for that. So in this colorful table down there, I'll actually direct you to the bottom part first. We have the statewide average productivity of these different land use types, the commodity price of those statewide commodity price that we use to value them, and then multiplying those together, getting the average estimated income of a typical acre of that land use type of the state. And that is based on the commodity price that we use to value. If you grow something else, your income is going to be different, but this is just a general estimate of what that value could produce, or that land could produce in gross income, based on the information that we have. So the rest of the table above that has the required productivity needed to meet income requirements per acre for each of those land use types. So if it's green, then the average acre of that land use type would meet that income requirement, right? So grazing land, average estimated income of an acre of grazing land can produce $13. So it would meet a $10 acre per acre requirement, but not $50 per acre requirement, right? So you can see irrigated and specialty crops, the average acre can meet a $200 acre income requirements, but none of the other land use types can meet that sort of income requirement. So varies greatly depending on how you use your land, the income you can produce. Shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, right? It makes sense. So that's what that table illustrates. And if you go to the next slide, Bryce, and this also feel free to ask any questions as we go through this. So this table has the percent of currently qualified agricultural parcels that would still qualify under different income per acre requirements, right? So even if we put a $5 per acre income requirement, 5% of grazing land would no longer qualify, but 95% still would, right? If you want to put a $100 per acre income requirement, no grazing land in the state would qualify for that. But most irrigated land would qualify for $100 an acre, right? So you can kind of look through that and see what level could be good for different land use types, et cetera. But it varies greatly depending on how you actually use your land, the income requirement that you could meet.
So Jared, let's just look at the grazing land, the $5 an acre, 95% qualify, right?
Correct.
So does that, when you came up with that, you went out and looked at the NRCS soil surveys and all that stuff?
Correct.
And did that, okay, that's how you
Yeah.
arrived at that. Does everybody track how we
Yeah.
did that, how we got there?
So that's
Alright.
based on all current agricultural or grazing land and their individual productivities and, yeah,
Off the soil maps.
correct,
Gotcha.
yes.
Yeah, this isn't based on actual receipts of income from these parcels. This is based on the department has a set productivity for every parcel, and that's what we use to value that land. And we're saying, based on that valuation formula, this is the gross income that we say this parcel should yield. And under that, even under that, $5 an acre, 5% of grazing land does not beat that $5 an acre.
Some of the very unproductive grazing acres wouldn't meet that, yeah.
But so, I mean, I guess what I think you should all take away from this is that grazing is significantly less productive per acre than any other agricultural type, which should, you know, that's probably obvious, but it's maybe something to keep in mind. And this is also using the AUM conversion of $60 per AUM. That is the basis of the $1,500 requirements for grazing.
And how did we get that $60?
So current law, required income is $1,500. MSU says to qualify as grazing land, you need to be able to carry 25 AUMs on your land. So $1,500 divided by 25 AUMs is $60 per AUM to be classified. And that's a good point you brought up, Dylan, because that is different than how we actually value grazing land. The value of grazing land uses $23.50 per AUM. So it is different qualifications we use to classify versus value.
Right, so, yeah, so everybody's tracking, nobody's getting sick, or most guys I know aren't getting $60 an AUM for renting grass. So,
Get back into it.
But we're looking at that differently. The $60 per AUM is the income that you're gonna get. The $26 is the grazing rate, that if you were leasing your land for grazing, that's what you're gonna
Right.
get. And so it's two different scenarios.
right, I
So
want
are
to
you-
make sure everybody's tracking that.
Are you still saying that at $26 or whatever, 95% will qualify at $5 an acre, but
This is based on,
5% won't,
this is based on $60.
on
in
$60.
AUM.
So it's
because that's
actually
how we
much larger than
classify it.
that. I mean, there's actually much more than 5% that won't qualify for $5 an acre.
Right, yeah, because the AUM carrying capacity is not what we use to value. It is different. And grazing is treated differently than some of the other crops.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This goes back to the
However,
conversation.
Yeah, for
it
sure.
depends on how there would be changes to the carrying capacity requirement, I assume. Does that sound right? I mean, 25 AUMs. Yes, they would have,
So 25 AUMs across the state,
correct, yes.
isn't that kind of interesting? Because it just seems like so many areas of Montana could not be able to sustain that high number, and some could sustain much higher.
I think if you look at it as the $60 per AUM is identifying that you're marketing those calves, you're selling those calves at market, and so you're making income. And that's where the $60 per AUM is coming from. You're not making all of your ag income from leasing that great land for grazing.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, we do have one question online. Mr. Story has a question.
Go ahead, Bob.
Well, Direct, you kind of asked it first. I saw that $60 number and I thought, what world is that in? You know, but
Yeah.
because the 2350 is the real number. You know, that's what the ag statistics says what grazing land's worth on the Olympic average, to my understanding. And so if you use that number instead of 60, then does that make more land not qualify at $5 an acre or less?
would make more not qualify.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
right now, $60 in AUM, the average parcel size would be 117 acres to qualify, based off of average statewide productivity. If you did 2350, you'd need 300 acres of grazing land to meet the $1,500 requirement.
Yeah, well, and then you really get down to the landlord's share of that 2350. I mean, when you don't use the full, do you use the full 2350 to set your value of land for tax purposes, or do you use some portion of that like you do in, you know, in irrigated or dry land? It's a quarter of the gross is you capitalized to get you the value of the land.
So what you're talking about was where kind of considered into the productivity portion of it, whereas the 2350 is considered that income that comes to the landlord. That is their income that comes in. That 25% is part of the productivity calculation in the process.
So the 2350 is what you capitalize, or is it some portion of that?
It would be the 2350.
That's essentially the
it's time-
commodity price. for
That's the
grazing.
commodity price, right? But you would take that times the productivity to get that for that each acre.
So by using the 60, and there's a question mark after this, but it's gonna be confused. By using the 60, we're actually increasing the number of acres that will qualify for the income requirement. If we went to the 23, it would decrease dramatically, but the 60 is the appropriate one to use, because if it was my own cow on it and not one of his and paying me rent, that's how much I would make theoretically off that 550 weight steer calf.
Yeah, and we had a conversation, me and Pat folks did about this, because I originally had 2350 in there, and I was like, this doesn't seem to add up, because you need 300 acres to qualify, and we know people with 80 acres qualify for grazing land, you know, the productive grazing land qualify with 80, so we talked about it, you have to qualify to classify as ag land, grazing set at $60.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's all based on the $1,500 flat income requirement. If that changes, carrying capacity, dollars per AUM would also change, so.
The other thing to consider though, is grazing already has a different requirement in the AUM piece. So if you were to move forward with recommendations, grazing could still have a different requirement, and rather than meeting an X amount of dollars per acre, they could just stick with the AUM and have the other commodity types have $1 per acre attached to it if that's what you choose.
Well, to play devil's advocate, doesn't that still allow large ranches to just automatically qualify then because they have?
Yeah, because
That is a catch.
already almost pretty much every grazing parcel, 160 acres or greater, are gonna need 25 AUM, so they'll qualify no matter what, anyway, based on, even to get rid of that, everything else stays the same, it's the quality.
With the exception of that 5% that night flat out at Sumatra. Nothing, he's gonna live there but a goat.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I still have a question relative to Cindy's question, and I mean, it still gets you to a huge number of animal unit months per acre, which is not the case in Montana hardly at all. I mean, one animal unit month per acre, maybe two on irrigated land is pretty much the top of the world, I think. And most of your dryland pasture, you're looking at acres per animal unit month. And so I'm not tracking, I guess, how some of these numbers are working maybe, but.
So if we switch to a per acre income requirement of, for grazing, for example, $5, and you had a 10,000 acre operation, you would have to produce 50,000 in income and you would qualify.
Well,
Gross.
that Maybe, but I'm still not struggling with how you ever came up with the dollars per acre in the first place, because they, you know, even at, you know, if you're working off some calculation off of $1,500. That's what I understood, but anyway,
Productivity is-
Yeah. Well, yeah, the $60 an acre is derived from the $1,500, which is what we have right now. It's the best gross income estimate we can get from grazing land as far as classifying it as grazing land is concerned. Valuing it is separate, right? So you'd have to change, like, if we change to a per acre thing, grazing land would probably be separate like it is now. We qualify through AUM still versus an income per acre. This is just, if you had to convert grazing land to income per acre, this is the only way we can do it.
So if I clarify that, and tell me if I'm wrong, Bob, just to make it simple enough that I can understand it, that 60 AUM is a fake number. That 60 AUM is the result of taking the statutory required $1,500 and backing into the 60.
Correct.
So that 60 is not based in anything other than what the law requires right now with its 1,500 minimum.
Well, it's based in MSU Ag School saying that is what an appropriate dollar per AUM is.
To arrive to get the 1,500, but you want the 1,500 is what you had, is the one thing that isn't the variable.
Right.
That's what we had to start with.
And what happens if it were 10,000 instead of 1,500?
The AUMs would have to go way up
Yeah.
to qualify, which means you need more land on average, right?
Right.
So it's all based on the 1,500 and how many AUMs.
Mhm.
Yeah, so if you increase the 1,500, MSU would come back to us and tell us, this is how many AUMs you need to meet the carrying capacity equivalent to this new income requirement.
Uh-huh.
And that's the kind of thing that would really mess with the guy whose name is the gentleman from Lewistown that talked to us a couple of times.
Yeah. Smith.
Yes, oh, yeah, yeah.
A small acreage grazier, even if he's
Yeah,
full-blown cowboy, would fall out of this. We would say that does not qualify, because even under existing standard, he's not qualified.
Right.
Bryce, if you go to the
Actually
next slide,
is
the next
qualified.
slide shows.
Is
that.
qualified?
Because he jumped through the hoops and got clippings
Yeah.
and got it measured and did all of the requirements that.
Yeah.
Oh,
So he
good.
proved he was above average productivity, right, essentially, so
Yes.
he was able to meet the 25 AUMs,
Sweet.
even though he doesn't have the average acreage that you need, he has higher productivity.
Gotcha, good for him.
So that's
I'm
what
glad
this
to hear
next
that.
slide shows actually, is the average acreage you would need using each land use type to meet that $1,500, or 3,000 or 4,000 is what I have in this chart here, so. Grazing is the one we're focusing on, obviously. So right now, with to meet the $1,500 requirement, you would need 117 acres on average, using the average statewide productivity. The 80-acre guy that was able to qualify has higher than average productivity. There might be a 160 acre that wouldn't qualify if they have very poor productivity, right? So then it just scales up as you increase the income requirement. If you want to put $4,000 income requirement, you need 312 acres of grazing land to meet that under the current rules and statutes, right? And then, you know, the more productive you get, specialty crops, you will need 4 acres right now on average to meet that $1,500. And we know people can do it on, you know, 3/4 of an acre because they have very productive. Kind of see what changing just a flat income requirement would do to different types of land.
What did you use for your crop, for your specialty crop? For your
We use bushel, spring wheat, yes, yeah, so specialty crops are a
specialty
unique
crops?
case, yeah.
Use spring wheat?
Yeah, so that's the commodity, so that is,
That's not so special.
yes, that's a good question, Bonnie, because we still value specialty crops based on spring wheat. We give them an extremely high productivity, what the highest productivity of the best continues to crop the land. So they all get, so all specialty crops have a 60 bushels an acre productivity,
That's
Which-
interesting.
which we then, well, so that's, so. Say that again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the value per acre, yeah. The gross income per acre that we use to reach that value is whatever is on this sheet, $358 an acre. Yeah, is the gross income. Then we get a net income capitalized and get the 1,000.
Yeah.
So obviously you can make more money growing apples than spring wheat. It's not, especially for specialty crops, this estimate understates it for sure. But it's the best we can do because we don't know what everybody's growing on every acre of specialty crop land in the state. This is just a general estimate. 4 acres is probably too high. 4 acres to me, $1,500 is probably higher than it actually is. Yeah, right, yeah, you do the right thing. So, not perfect, but it's the best we can do with the information that we have on it for every parcel. All makes sense. Anybody have any other questions?
I have so many questions.
Yeah,
The per acre is, if you did a per acre calculation, it's not linear at all. Right, because to meet the qualification, a 10,000 acre ranch would have to sell 5 steers. 180 acre would have to sell 1 steer.
Oh, I see what you're saying, yeah.
So you're basically, yeah, it's,
Doesn't make sense.
the more acres you have, it gets exponentially easier to meet the
To
qualification.
qualify.
Right.
But is that wrong?
Probably not, depending on what the,
Depending on the product, depending on the commodity.
yeah, and like Mark said, it's not linear,
Right.
but to some extent, you do have an economy of scale
Mhm.
with more than 1 acre, right?
It just seems like if 1,000 acres, it only takes 5 head, you're not really engaged in
Exactly.
functional.
So there's a whole lot more to
Cattle
this
operation.
than just the income function.
Right. Problem with that is then we get into way subjectivities.
Okay.
Of course.
10,000.
Oh, 10,000, yeah,
Five
Besides
steers.
cowboy or
yeah,
not.
yeah,
Yeah,
180 acres is 1.
yeah.
intent has a whole lot to do with it.
Right,
Well, you know, and I think this gets into something that, you know, your department would not like to do, but I mean, the conceptual ideas that I've heard through the years was kind of like, what could this property generate? I mean, how many cows could you run on your 10,000 acres? And are you at 70% of that? 5% of that, right? And what level of actual use of the land in production do you base off of being a real cowboy? And I don't know what that number is, but it seems like it probably needs to be closer to 70% capacity than 20% capacity.
conceptually, I would agree with you. Practically, I don't know how in the world you do it, right?
I don't know, these guys are good with numbers.
These poor guys.
That's essentially what this per acre income requirement is doing. It's saying, yeah, at $60 an AUM, if we back that out and say, we could instead say how many dollars or how many AUM per acre we say that land is capable of producing. I mean, that information we already have based on the soil survey, productive capacity. But, you know, and then if you want to say you need to meet 70% of what the department considers the productive capacity of your land to qualify, that's a yes or no thing.
I just made all the hair on my neck stand up. Yeah, the answer is no. Not only no, but hell no.
But you know
For
what
a
that's,
million reasons, right? That everybody that's ever tried to grow something on an acre of ground knows. There is way more. We have to have something to value our acreages, and this is the best maybe for coming up with how to mass appraise the fourth largest state in the country's ag properties. But I am not at all whatsoever convinced that we're 100% right on every acre out there based on NRCS. And a year-to-year deal. He got a rainstorm the other day. I had an inch of wind. He's gonna be more productive this week than I am, for darn sure. Right? That just scares me from I mean, we're not, I don't know that there is a way. Ross, conceptually, I agree with you, but the practicalities of that, you just scare me to death. And secondly, I don't think the state tax appeal board has enough hours in the day to hear these appeals for the rest of everybody in this room's career. Mine might be short. I did this.
Mine too.
But I mean, do you guys agree? It makes sense to do it from a mass appraisal standpoint, that then somebody could say, I'm not sure I'm buying that. And we've had that, right? The taxpayer comes in and says, Bonnie could give you story after story, but that's legit, right? They come in with an AB 26 and says, hey, Bonnie, you think this thing is high production and it's really a bentonite flat. That's why we have the AB 26. But I would be really concerned about having the Department of Revenue saying, yeah, that place should run 700 cows and you're only running 250, so you're not a real cowboy.
So how do you balance this, really out of balance conceptual idea? And it's obviously, we haven't worried about 10,000 acre places because you just automatically in. But if you're gonna start looking at 10,000 acre places and ask them to fill something out that says I'm engaged in ag production, I don't think we can base it off of $1,500 on a
No,
under 160 because, right? I mean, we just said it. It goes from 1 cow to 5.
there has to be more than a financial component. There has to be.
So now we get into a subjective component. How do we administer a subjective component?
I don't
Senator, you got an
know.
idea?
No, but therein lies the problem.
The subjective
Yeah,
component,
yeah.
And you're right, intent would be the right
Intent, yeah.
thing, but there's been an awful lot of criminal trials out there on who's proven whether or not somebody intended to do something.
Right.
How do you prove intent? How do you administer intent from appraising all the ag land in fourth
If you
largest
go
state?
through an agricultural cycle every year, that's pretty evident that you've got the intent to be involved in production agriculture. If you couple that with an income requirement, then it may make sense to do it uniformly across the board.
Okay. Meaning when you say go through an agricultural cycle, you mean I sold the product of some amount of ag product every year?
Or even if you didn't sell it, if you had an insurance indemnity because of the process, or if you banked it, whatever, because we have some farmers who sit on their green for 20 years, waiting for the price to go up.
I just did that last fall. I
Yeah.
couldn't give a bale of hay away. It's still sitting there.
Yeah, so, but their intent is to sell that product. Whether they did it or not, it's pretty obvious because they went through the cycle. They plant it, they tend it, whether it's a cattle crop, a goat crop, a cherry crop, they've done something with it every year in a cycle.
And you could look at that by the inputs, right? You actually put hay up. You didn't say, yeah, I'm gonna just let it sit in the field. You put the inputs in, put it in a bale, stack it in a stack.
So that takes us back to a Schedule F, right? Does a Schedule F show intent?
Yeah.
I mean,
You have
I
expenses.
would argue it does.
Yeah. Yes, it does. Doesn't matter if you file it as a corporation or if you file it as an individual.
Now, we're getting off base here. I'll go back to that
Okay, sorry.
because we are talking about the income requirements, but like, we just I think everybody kind of agreed that there's more to this than just an income requirement. As you pointed out, you have 10,000 acres and 5 cows. Well, anybody can basically pull the fake cherry grower stunt with that, right? Effectively. 5 cows on 10,000 acres is effectively planting your 100 trees and not doing anything with it.
I mean, part of it is that $1,500 is an arbitrary number.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is there an arbitrary number at over so many acres or something? I mean,
And that 1,500 has not been adjusted for inflation for 30+ years.
Right, and again, that's all for non-qual, right? That's all the sub one sixty. That isn't even talking about 160 plus. That's just the, you had to earn.
but that's where it becomes distinctly out of line, is when you go over 160 by very much, then it becomes obvious that arbitrary $1,500 doesn't work.
Right, which wasn't aimed at the 160 plus anyway.
So is there an arbitrary number over? That you base it off?
So the $1,500 income was introduced in 1985 and has not been adjusted since then.
Okay, 40 years.
If we did run the numbers, it would be $4,200 something now. So that's why I have $4,000 in this chart actually, is if you want to bring up 4,000, like, if you want to just adjust the $1,500 by inflation, this is what it would do essentially, that $4,000.
So we can show what the potential is on 10,000 acres in any given neck of the woods. So wouldn't we provide the choice of the property owner to say, I should be, to qualify for ag land, I should be producing more. Otherwise, I can check a box here and say, I'm only engaged in ag production on, 10% of that. I think we need to put that decision-making back on the property owner.
So to set a kind of dollar per acre requirement for each individual parcel based on their productivity and what we think based on soil surveys that they can produce, is that what you're saying?
Not quite that detailed, but to take a zone and say you should be able to do X number of AUMs or crop.
Cause you're,
We would still use a soil survey, yeah.
yeah, but even a soil survey, I have fields that cross county lines. And you would be surprised at the productivity, the difference in the productivity level between this foot and this foot, literally.
But it's not.
It's like, are you kidding me? But it's totally different people making assumptions and not, I mean, they're not sticking a probe in the ground to find out what's in there, they're just making assumptions. So I think to have a number is probably better than to try to make a judgment on productivity value based on somebody else's numbers, based on somebody else's evaluation or lack thereof.
I don't know if this directly applies to what we're talking about at the moment, but the thought just came to me that we should be very careful that we're not forcing people into making stewardship decisions over their land that may not be what's best strategically for how they're running their place. And again, I don't know if that directly applies right now, but if we're saying you have to produce X, your land should be able to produce X number of whatever, and then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, they're like, well, we need to do something different this year, but we're saying we have to do this to qualify for that, you're boxing them in to a decision that may not be best for the land or for them. So that just came to mind as we're talking about this. I think it's perfectly reasonable to expect people to do production and to be in production, but how do we do that without forcing their hands, so to speak?
When you have crop rotation, sometimes you have fallow land. There's zero income on that land. But I'm assuming that your productive value is probably an average of those things that are fallow and those things that are not, right?
Should be the productive capacity already takes account of that. So,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
fallow
So-
land, it's only like an eighth of the actual productive capacity of the land that gets considered as production to account for years where it's laying fallow.
So that would answer your question as to making, a conservation judgment, maybe.
But you might in some respects,
Some,
it
yeah.
might not, let's say, drought free grazing land
True.
or something. But that's what kind of scares me about this, but we'd almost have to establish, I don't know if this is the right word, such a low minimum to take care of, to accommodate when he gets rain and I don't. And am I gonna have to take my place and it's suddenly turned into 30,000 acres of residential land? I'm gonna have to graze it to the dirt. In a dry year, I don't wanna have to do that, and that's your point.
That's my point.
Right.
So, you know, obviously the BLM and DNRC do the same thing, you know, on public lands, they determine, I think, drought 2 years ago, BLM came in, that reduced stocking by 30% or something.
They did.
You know, now obviously that takes range specialists determining what it looks like, and that gets to be a bit of a lift when you start talking FTEs and how you're trying to cover it, but I mean, that is built into those determinances on, you know, management of public lands for sure. They look at those very things. Is it drouthy or isn't it?
So I have one other comment I just want to throw out here for you to think about as you talk about this. And that is talking about the productivity that the department uses from the soil survey. Remember, we only use 3 different crops. We're using spring wheat or the animal unit grazing, which, for the grazing land, or our alfalfa hay. Montana produces so many other crops, and they're not such crops such that you can convert what the harvest is of one type of crop to the other. So there's no way for the department to be able to say this land should produce this much by our recommendations, and because someone's giving us some other crop harvested. There's no way for us to be able to convert that and look at that. So just something to throw out there. Again,
Very
that's
good point.
stewardship, I think.
Is the problem crops or is the problem grazing tobacco? Like,
It's crops.
Go ahead.
So if we went to like the inflation adjusted 4,000, 73% would qualify. Do we have any statistic on what would have qualified in 1985?
I don't.
I mean, was only 70% qualifying then?
I see what you're asking.
And now over time, it's gone to 100?
And we don't have data back that far. And they completely changed the methodology on how ag land is valued in 2009 for that reappraisal. That's when we went to the soil surveys. There was an entirely different process. And ag land really hadn't been quote unquote reappraised in like 40 years up until that 2009 switch in methodology to the soil survey. So, yeah.
Mark, I was expecting somebody to whip out their fancy dancing calculator.
So, I mean, I think back to the previous comment about, is it ag or is it farming or is it grazing? You know, it seems to me that to determine whether land is in production and farming is much easier than it is on the grazing side of it. And I know that seems to be like the impetus that I felt from people saying, hey, we gotta do something about it, is about former producing ag lands being put into recreational use. That's primarily all grazing. There's sometimes you find where they had some hay that they got rid of or they did something, but it really seems to be around, you know, people taking it out of production, and the production they're taking out of tends to be grazing more than anything. It seems like you can come up with a definition of, are you engaged in farming or not? That's, you know, not even necessarily related to how much money you make off of it. It's there again, it's inputs and activity. I think the harder one is grazing in determining, is it really in production? What's a reasonable amount of production? Because we all know that varies dramatically. But to me, that is the specific type of ag production that's most in question right now.
So the questions have been posed to me several times, Ross, is what if you're just not good at it? I mean, what if you're a really bad rancher or a really bad farmer and you just can't make any money at it? I always say it's a gross number, it's not a net number for sure. And
Right.
you've got inputs.
Right, I mean, because to me, it's, okay, so you've got a 10,000 acre place that traditionally they ran 400 head of cows on it. And you're still running 400 head, but you're losing your fan. Well, you're still running the cattle, you're just not very good at it. That would be my take. And then what percentage of that? I mean, if you determine AUMs on this 10,000 acre place, you should be able to run 400 head and you're only running 250. Well, maybe that still qualifies, right? I mean, you know, it's not 100% of it. It's like some number that says, even if you're bad at it, you're trying.
So you're saying
That
we
is
should
different.
separate that from the income
Apprenticeship program.
Well, I mean, yeah, I
would
mean, that's the
go-
hard part about the income. As soon as you put the income requirement on it, now it's about, are you any good at it or not?
Mhm.
Right.
Not if you, but she says if not, if it's a gross number, really.
Yeah,
Well, that helps.
because you're gonna have to sell something,
Yeah.
right?
And I think the whole
All
key
your
is
gas out,
to
you're in trouble.
keep this thing
As soon as you
simple,
sell that bull, it's no
Yeah.
good.
isn't it? I mean, from a Department of Revenue standpoint, you wanna keep it simple. And I'm sure if we were gonna pass it in the legislature,
It better be simple.
it's gonna have to be kept simple.
And the
So,
taxpayers deserve it to be simple.
yeah, yeah.
Most importantly.
I mean, you can say this parcel of land should produce this, but this one should produce a different amount. It gets pretty complex after a while.
Mhm.
So that's why I think the dollar an acre still, or the dollar amount per acre,
Per
whatever it
acre.
may be,
Mhm.
is just simple.
And maybe it should be adjusted according to the size after 160, you know. I don't
Or the
know,
type of
or type.
production.
Yeah.
Is that doable? I mean, farmland should maybe earn $30 an acre, but
Mhm.
grazing land should earn $5 an acre. Is that doable? Or-
I think it gets complicated just in the fact that there aren't very many just one operations. You have 500 acres of hayland and you have 300 acres of grazing and that's when it starts to get more complicated when we have to start piecing all those together to make those determinations. Not that it's impossible, but it does add to the complexity and therefore the cost.
Right, and what we don't wanna do, I think, going with what you're saying, I think that's the problem, is, I mean, I assume a lot of ag producers, if there's many acres, I mean, your property tax bill can sometimes be this thick, with each different parcel. We certainly don't want producers or the Department of Revenue have to go through and say, well, geocode XYZ produced X and geocode ABC produced Y. That takes us back to that complexity thing. I'm with John on simple is the best for the taxpayer.
Right.
And it's best for the taxpayer for two reasons. One, they can understand it, and B, we can implement without, it's gotta be easy enough for us to do that the taxpayer can understand it, that we're all on the same page. Otherwise, we just created a
We have to sell it.
disaster.
We have to sell it in the legislature.
And what's the potential impact on local government? Because it's your property taxes
Right. Well, I think all you'd see was an increase
Yeah,
from where we're at.
from where we're at.
Well, an increase in value, right? Because if the status quo was everybody who's basically an ag.
Mhm.
Maybe, just as an example, maybe one of the places in Ross's County suddenly fell out. Well, the certified value of that went up
Mhm.
in his county or that jurisdiction. And so therefore there was more taxable value, just like a new piece of,
Well, that would be my question is, I wouldn't assume that because you went from ag to non-ag status, that's new taxable value. Which means it should really just fall under the umbrella of base values, it's just shifting the burden. So
Right.
if
Okay,
John's
right.
neighbor falls out and he has to pay more, assuming you're in the same, well, I don't know if you got any next in the same county, but the point is that within that taxing jurisdiction, it changes out. It means that this guy's paying a little higher percentage of the overall rate, but local government should see
Significant
it should
change.
be just a status quo. It shouldn't change anything.
you're right, Ross, you're right, but it would decrease everybody else's.
It would decrease
tax
everybody
bill.
else's and increase, which goes back to sort of the point, is that we're trying to support local ag production. And so to qualify, you should be gainfully employed in it.
and they can go read farming or grazing for dummies and increase
Their ability.
their gross proceeds.
But what about, oh, I'm sorry.
Go,
I was just gonna say, we don't have a problem with them being bad farmers either, because they're just buying more equipment and more feed and more fencing. Everybody's happy.
Mark, go ahead.
It seems like as we talk through a lot of these scenarios and come up with questions and all that, kind of goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning. What's the real question here? And it seems like more and more, the question is, do we have an issue with grazing land over 160 acres versus the cherry farm or the ag land that people are producing wheat, and it's pretty simple. They either are or they aren't.
Are you doing little bites of the apple at a time here?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of boiling it down to, seems like we're trying to encompass everything ag in the state of Montana. And that's
I tend to,
almost
I
impossible.
tend to agree. I mean, you know, the under 160s wasn't even in my radar when we were talking about it. All I was thinking about was the big trophy farms, ranches coming in, buying it up, kicking the cattle off, and going out of the occupation of being a producer.
But what you have is small acreages, like on the Flathead, who've been recently changed hands and planted 100 acres or 100 cherry trees to be able to qualify as agriculture, and they have lakefront property.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good.
And so I think that we have to consider the small acreages also for their impact to the other landowners whose tax bill goes up because of that.
Right.
But I agree with you that less is more, and perhaps just eliminating the automatic qualifier after 160 is one of those simple things that we could do. And the other thing that we talked about early on was the function of why do we just have land and ag land and not all of these other different classifications of land, like the non-qualified and the everything from 0 to 160. You know, you've got several other classifications of land that are, some are quasi land or quasi agriculture or connected to agriculture somehow, but there are different, I mean, how many different classifications of land do we have?
Overall land. Ag, non-qual,
And then,
and ag.
yeah,
Forest.
Abe's got forest,
Oh,
but
forest.
Abe's got different class codes for the different uses.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Story has a question.
Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, on the inflation adjustment, I think, you know, you have to be kind of cautious using like a CPI adjuster on, say, the $1,500, because we all know that other than a few extreme times, the commodity prices have not inflated significantly above what they were in 1985, especially on things like wheat. I mean, it got up there pretty good this last couple of years. It's all headed back the other way now. So I don't know, you know, if just saying, well, $1,500 in 85 is $4,000 now, it really ties well with what's going on in agriculture with the prices of products that are being sold, especially when you have that kind of inflation applying to inputs that far exceeds the inflation applied to outputs. But that was a discussion I was going to bring up when you were back on that. But I tend to agree with what you're talking about now, that, you know, that we're really looking at a pretty small subset of the property in Montana that the problem's with, and it's with large grazing operations that, for the most part, I don't think a lot of this, you know, anybody that gets into farming pretty much has to farm, or they're gonna have some real financial troubles. You know, you can't sit on irrigated cropland or dryland farmland and not do anything with it. You have to pretty much produce on those.
Bob raises a really good point. I mean, the cattle cycle is a 10-year deal, right? And I haven't compared the bottom of the last cycle to what it was in 1985, but it probably wasn't all that far off. So Bob's point is very well taken, that the CPI doesn't really match. And I don't know what the grain cycle is. I'm not much of a farmer, but so that, Bob, that's a really good point on what your gross income could be. So thank you. Because I hadn't really thought about that when we were looking at this, and I should have.
That includes the market value of an AUM. Over the last 4 years. Well, and that 1985 Chevy pickup truck probably costs more now than it did then.
Yours might. So let me just pose this then. Mark kind of picked up, I think, from what Ross said, was where is the problem here? Have we narrowed the problem down to two things? And this is an ask. Have we narrowed it down to over 160 in grazing is probably one of the maybe inequities out there in some of these. And the other is the non-qual. So what if, whoop, sorry.
Can I add a
Yeah,
third
no, please
to
do.
your?
Please do. I thought she was gonna hit me.
I think the third would deal with those specialty crops and the number of acres that they're using for ag. And I think we need to flip flop that around to say, yes, you have a cherry orchard. Sits on your 8-acre parcel, it's covering 2 acres. You get ag status on 2 acres and what is being used as ag and not blanket the whole parcel with ag. I think that's a third piece of it that maybe
Let me ask a
could be
question on that.
considered.
Cause, so, say I'm a cherry farmer, I got 10 acres, and I'm on a 10-acre tract, and I'm raising cherries or vines or whatever. And I'm legit, I mean, this is what I do. And I've got 8 acres or 6 acres of cherries, but I need a house, and I need bins, I need whatever the heck a cherry farmer needs in infrastructure to operate my orchard. I mean, I've got a yard at my place, with bins and shops and fuel tanks and all that stuff. I'm assuming, I wouldn't know, I'm assuming you're gonna have some of that stuff in that business as well. And so I don't wanna suddenly say, well, all right, Beatty, your headquarters and shop and stuff, you're still a cowboy, but sorry, Brian, you're only a cherry farmer right up to the edge of the trees. What,
Well,
Robin, am I wrong on how that works?
No, that's a good question.
I think conversely, another way to look at it is just the treatment of a 1-acre home site. Because that's really where the discrepancy comes in, is that if you have forest land, you get the preferential forest rate, but if you have that 1-acre home site, it's market value.
Okay.
If you're non-qual, you have a house on it, you get the preferential rate on all that excess acreage, but that 1-acre home site has a market value on it. The ag, the real benefit, especially in the specialty crop area, is the treatment of that 1-acre site getting valued at $2,003 versus its market value. So if you're talking equity issue, that's where the real equity or inequity comes into play, is the treatment of that 1-acre site and how it's valued versus all the other 1-acre sites. And you could just fix that one piece and it would stop probably 95% of those specialty crops from even applying, because the way we value the 1-acre site versus all your excess land, you know, the majority of the value for valuation purposes is in that 1 acre, and then it drops off significantly. But if you're talking about your large operators like you, moving 1 acre to market value out of 10,000 isn't gonna break the bank versus all $10,000 being at a market value. So you can also just look at addressing how that 1 acre is valued and then not have to worry about this dichotomy of splitting out these acres are being used and these acres aren't being used, because that's where the real benefit lies.
Okay.
Is in the treatment of that 1 acre site in comparison to everything else.
So, go ahead, Brian.
Oh, well, I'd add one little caveat or specification to that the 1 acre has to be valued at, because what a person can do with their lake, but they value by the lakefront. And how much lake frontage you have, so they carve out that acre, oh, this isn't lakefront acreage. You know, this, because it doesn't, this acre for my house doesn't actually border the lake, you know, so it would have to be considered the highest value for that property, which would be the lakefront. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, sure, because really lakefront doesn't matter for a cherry.
Right, so, but for the
house
home,
site.
for the home site, you couldn't say the home site is not lakefront property. And everything else on the
Right.
property is lakefront.
Right, you'd have to So we do have circumstances that are just that way, especially with the non-qual type. So if we have created an influence for the tract land people that is view or riverfront or lakefront or something like that, those non-qual parcels would get a 1 acre market value that equates to
Yeah.
whatever that influence land would be. And so that is a piece of it that would have to happen. If you're situated such that your neighbor who is completely tract land is valued at this much, that's how you would have to be valued with your 1 acre as well.
Because, I mean, the house could sit quite a ways away from the lake, and they could carve out an acre that says it's not lakefront property, it's up on the road, you know, or something, so. But you would,
If your parcel itself touches the lake, it becomes lakefront
There you go.
property regardless of where your house is located on that
yes,
parcel.
well, that'd make a huge difference.
If there's a house on it, right?
Right.
So Brian could have all 20 acres of all trees. No house, that 20 acres isn't lakefront, that's an
Okay.
orchard.
Right.
Yeah.
But he might have a 1 acre right next to that. That would be lakefront.
Right.
And is that something, I mean, are your guys gonna freak out if something like this went down?
I hope so.
Remember, we have the art of the possible to talk about, but what I just heard, and I didn't know this, you'd think, but there's a lot of things directors don't know, every day I find more. But, so, and I know my place, in the middle of the dirt out there, there's an acre that's got my house on it, and that's valued at,
$2,003.
there you go.
That piece
You
of
got
land.
overvalued my house.
Land.
Oh, okay.
I was just gonna say that.
You haven't seen that.
I want a
mess.
reappraisal.
That's right. And so's John's and so's Cindy's. And Brian's neighbor who's got a cherry farm is valued, his house isn't separated out of that orchard.
It
Like
is.
mine is.
So if Brian's neighbor has an orchard right now, his 1 acre is worth $2,003 because he's qualified ag.
Even with the house on it.
Yes.
So it actually is a different treatment between those properties, correct?
Well,
Not currently.
Am I-
They're all valued at 2003 acres.
Qualified ag.
Oh, right,
Not across
right.
qualified
It's-
ag.
Right,
When
gotcha.
compared
Yep,
to
that's right.
non-qual and forest land.
Right, okay.
There's the inequity or the non-equal treatment of that 1 acre because forest gets the preferential rate on all the forest land, but the 1 acre is market value.
Gotcha. I had that backwards.
Non-qual gets the preferential rate on the excess acres, but the 1 acre is market value. And that's really where the benefit comes in on primarily just specialty crops, but any of these small parcels. You know, your person in the middle of Missoula that's growing parsley in their back garden and selling at the farmer's market, they're now getting that $2,003 value in the middle of Missoula. That's where the real disconnect in the qualified ag versus all the other classes come in, is the treatment of that 1 acre. Whereas, again, we probably aren't putting a huge strain on larger operations to move that 1 acre to a market value. Certainly not to the extent of kicking them completely out of ag and valuing them what it's truly worth. But you can solve some of those problems without having to, again, worry about well, you're only using these 17 of the 24 acres, so we're gonna treat these 7 different.
Yeah.
If you just treated that 1 acre site, if there is a house at market value, you would solve a lot of those other
Your 1 acre
issues.
site would go from 2003 to 2100,
Yeah, right,
depending upon your location.
right.
If your lakefront,
Petroleum County is a hotbed of
a lakefront
residential
property can go
development.
from $2,000 to $1 million in value.
Right.
That's huge. If we got rid of the flat rate.
Yeah.
And
Mr.
that-
Chair,
that-
Mr.
Back of about 1985, the department that came out with the plan that every home site would be market value. And that brought busloads of farmers and ranchers to Helena to object to that concept. But it might be something worth revisiting because, you know, if that solved half of these problems, you know, if the 1 acre under your home on your ranch in Gallatin County would be worth quite a bit. The 1 acre under your Brendan's house out in Petroleum County might not be worth as much as it is right now, as Robin said, because really all they're valued at is the highest rate of irrigated land. That's where you get the 2,300 or whatever. And that all got back to how do you value it? Put some value on it because it has some improvements on it, water and sewer and that kind of stuff. How do you value those? Because that one time there was going to be a assessment for the well and an assessment for the septic system and that thing kind of stuff, and that caused some heartburn. And so simplify the system. Let's just pick a number and generate some money. And that would take care of at least the people using the system to get around paying market value on their residential property.
All right, just so I'm clear. Does the house itself, is that market value? Is it just the land that's?
Correct.
So yeah, the house, the improvement is.
Now, keep in mind, on agricultural property, it's a replacement cost new less depreciation value as opposed to a comparable sales value. We can't use comparable properties and what they've sold for to value that house on ag land because the land itself isn't at a market value. So it is a market value, but a cost value and not a comparable sales value.
So is that happen, Robin, then on these lakefront properties too?
That's right.
So if you have a McMansion on there, it's replacement cost, not what that thing might be worth.
Correct.
So in theory, if you just switched like non-qualified, that would, and you said that has to be market value for your house, that would solve 98% of the issues. And
So-
probably,
If you did not have non-qualified land, is that what you're saying?
If we did away with the non-qual classification.
Right.
Is that what-
But
is that what
if
you're
we
saying?
gave the first acre of all land,
Market value.
land, period, a market
Market value.
value, because tract land is at market value already.
Mhm.
Ag land, that first acre that the house sits on would be market land. Non-qual, the first
Mhm.
acre is market land, so all of that would be.
That doesn't
considered
seem
market.
unreasonable.
No, that sounds like.
I agree.
I mean, because, well, land under your house is
It's
probably
not
worth,
worth 2,000.
probably worth $500.
Yeah.
Land
Yeah.
under my house might be worth, the 1 acre might be worth $1,500, but land under my irrigated neighbor's house might be worth $4,000. So the value of the surrounding, that could be controversial,
Based on market sales.
but it's
Right.
gotta, yeah, okay. So there's some,
But I think when you get to market value on that acre, you're not talking you're talking thousands. I mean, $10,000, $20,000 for a lot, right?
on
And
anything.
Depends on where you're at.
That's less than an acre lot too, usually.
But
But
isn't that,
maybe.
is that where the trouble's gonna come from? Is how do you decide what the market value of an acre home site in Petroleum County
We
is
do it all the
versus?
time.
Mhm.
We have to do it for non-qual, so we already know what that value
Oh,
is.
okay. So it's actually doable and it
Oh, yeah.
actually is defensible?
Absolutely.
Okay. Importantly, is it defensible?
We do it all the
All
time.
right. Does- You know, she didn't say, yes, it's defensible. She answered with, we do it all the time. I want you guys to heard that,
But it
right?
would be good to know what that differential is before you get too far down the road.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Bob. And Brian had his hand up. Go
Okay,
ahead.
I just, gonna answer your question too about the infrastructure, like for the cherry farm. So what the majority of the situations are is they have their 1 acre farm, but they have a custom guy take care of it. So they don't have to have a $60,000 tractor and a $40,000 sprayer and a barn and a cooler, and they don't have to have any infrastructure, just that plot of trees. And then somebody else does all the work. So, you know, because you were asking about that, how that would hit.
So that's if I bought this and I really wanted to hang out at Flathead, it'd be cool. I'd have a custom guy do my
Farming.
cherries.
Yeah.
But you're a cherry guy, right? You must have a house and a barn and a
Yeah,
shop and
but
all that. And I just don't know, I don't wanna start going after somebody's ag infrastructure
Right.
while I don't go after my
There's
own.
not a lot involved because it's all shipped to another place to be packed. So you don't have to have a big warehouse. I mean, there's some people that do, but I guess that would be separate because that'd be a commercial operation or something. But I mean, I have a small cooler and a barn and an equipment yard and, you know, some things that aren't actually producing, but.
So the
it's-
people that have the custom people come in, do they essentially, are they leasing their cherry crop to this guy on a crop share
Sometimes
basis?
Sometimes it's
Or
on a lease, yeah. Sometimes it's just by the hour.
then they're just paying him as labor?
Yeah. They'll just go from orchard to orchard with their mower and then their sprayer and then their picking crew and, you know.
Sure.
And so it works, but the actual owner of the orchard doesn't have to. be a
The
farmer,
finger
right? Not
yeah.
do that, yeah. But then the other question I had though, if you did make this change, would everybody be grandfathered in presently or no?
Probably not.
No, because we're talking about taking away non-qual and you have to apply, so.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So everybody would be starting at ground zero.
Yeah.
But if you do it uniformly across the whole state, it impacts every one of us.
Yeah, you wouldn't have a equal protection issue that I can think of, or
I
anything
wouldn't
like
think
that. Might have a hard time getting it through the legislature, but there is that.
Well, if they weren't all wealthy landowners on the Flathead, no.
So,
I can guarantee I'm not.
no Lakeview in my place. So, I mean, we're kind of narrowing this down as Mark and Ross took us, and I'm asking a question, is that kind of where we're going? But then I'm gonna run into this question.
She gave me the idea.
Oh, so
She
your
needs
plan
some, she needs
ideas?
some, well, she gets some credit as well.
It was a collaborative effort.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I'm with you, because I think it's making sense. Now, so non-qual for sure is something we gotta look at. Or deal with is maybe the better word. Is that the right question? Is we're gonna do something with non-qual,
Yes.
or we're gonna try, okay.
Well, and I think the same thing with non-qual is it should no longer be automatic. So, and,
So then it'd just be ag.
well, it's not,
Either it is
you
or it
have
isn't.
to apply, and if you qualify, you qualify. If you don't, you're track land.
Right, what we say is you're either ag land or you're tract land. There's not this non-qual
Right.
stuff in the middle. So there's issue A. I think we're gonna focus on issue A, at least one of the things we're focusing on. Is that good?
Can I add something to that though,
You're
because
making this harder.
I know.
All right, go ahead.
Because we talked about this prior to this meeting, our internal staff with TPR, and one of the questions was, you know, what's gonna make it through the legislature? What do we think is palatable by all sides? And so rather than completely eliminating non-qual, we think everybody has to apply. But what if there's a backup for the guy that can't quite make it? Maybe he has 80 acres of grazing, but he does have cows on it, and he is trying to become an agricultural operation, good faith use, or all those definitions and some of those other states that you guys all liked. So if they've applied, they're proving that they're attempting to use their property in an agricultural way, but can't quite meet the qualifications. Is there a non-qual that they fall back on, or do they just not make it and go to tract land?
Wouldn't you say you can prove qualifications with the following criteria?
A, B, or C.
Yeah,
Or a combination.
or a combination of, and just
Yeah.
basically have a catch-all.
Mhm.
Which,
Or those smaller, yeah, the between 20 and 160, or between 5, or between 2 and 160.
Well, in looking at these charts, you can kind of tell, you know, if they're grazing and they don't have 117 acres, even at $1,500, they might not make it.
Right.
And if they're below average, it might be even more than 117 acres that they need, but they are making an attempt. I mean, I think that's a definition that we would need out of you guys, is what is that good faith effort, or what is that legitimate attempt? So that we don't create more loopholes for people to jump through, you know, what kind of proof are we gonna want? Do we have to have some sort of income, but maybe it's not $1,500? Do we need to have some sort of,
Do those people have to, when they file their taxes, if they claim agriculture, don't they have to file a Schedule F?
No.
We talked about.
They don't have
this
to?
before.
No, but maybe not for the state of Montana, but for federal income tax. Or do they just tell you they're ag and they don't tell the federal government they're ag, or what?
Probably, because I mean, if you're not really farming, the federal government doesn't care, right? You just wouldn't have Schedule F.
But if you are.
If you are, you will file a Schedule F because it'd help.
But if you want the state of Montana to believe you are, shouldn't you have some kind of qualifier, some kind of documentation that says, stand up and count me. I am a farmer, I am a rancher, I am a produce grower, whatever.
I have a question for Robin though. You were talking about Steve who's down there,
Yep.
right? Well, he came in, he didn't qualify, I mean, he didn't hit the criteria, then he did the research and, you know, he's a range specialist, right? So he could do it. But he was able, I mean, obviously, there's a way for you to say, oh, yeah, okay, even though you don't hit this, you've proven that you are. I mean, isn't that what we're talking about? Like, you can kind of appeal and then demonstrate that you really are producing at the level that your property can actually produce at and meet some criteria.
A, B, and or C.
Right, but what you gotta do, make sure is we didn't just create another non-qual ag in our
No.
exceptions, right?
Well, it's not really an exception, if that person is gonna go through the effort to prove he is agriculture, then is there anything that precludes the Department of Revenue from going back the year before and say, yeah, you really did qualify for a lower rate and make that adjustment? Or do you just take money and not give it back?
Well, you have to protest your taxes on the front end, not the back end.
Yeah, it'd be just like every other property.
Because otherwise you'd come to the county commissioners and ask for us to sign that tax abatement and say no.
Yeah,
Those commissioners are tough to deal with.
they are.
I just want a little clarification here, so, and have a little mercy with me, because I don't know much about grazing, but let's say, you have an 80-acre farmer or 80-acre property owner at the moment, and the AUMs are just like, what, in the basement, horrible. So they can't meet that dollar requirement, because the AUM requirement. But you can say, well, you're trying, so it's okay. Or should you say, well, this land isn't cut out for farming, so you can't be a farmer? Or can you say, well, why don't you put in a half-acre of garlic? You know, and then you could get your $1,500. I don't know. See what I'm saying? Because you could do that with any parcel. It could be 20 acres, and then you're back to non-qualified.
then you're a specialty crop, at least for a portion of it, and then the rest could be technically qualified as grazing if you put in something that would produce that income
But
requirement.
those are choices.
What about a feedlot?
That's commercial.
Okay.
But the point being is that the land isn't cut out for grazing
Right.
at that size, but you could still be a farmer and get ag status,
If you tried something different.
or if you just try harder.
And some of this stuff you can try all you want, man.
Yeah.
One fluffy.
Yeah, one
Or
fluffy.
if you sell one fluffy, then you.
That's right.
So that's the question is,
Or
do you want there to be some sort of a fallback that after application or not, and just completely eliminate? That was just something that we
Well-
considered.
So Robin, maybe one of the things you could do is kind of adapt your provisional thing that you do for the cherry guys, you know, come in and say, we'll give you 3 years to get there. Something like that, you know, and then, you know, they'd have a chance to bump it up and find a way to make it work, or they wouldn't.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of this comes down to the grazing, particularly in that AUM criteria, because really the fail-safe with the AUM on the grazing is so that you can't have the 10 acres that you put a cow on for one day and then sell and say, here's my $1,500, that's kind of the, you know, to stop that from happening, and there's really no way around that conundrum without having an AUM per
Right,
acre equivalent to
we're selling fluffy for
reach
$10,000.
that income zone. I mean, 'cause that's what you run into, and what we can't possibly ever verify is, well, what is, you have to graze 6 months out of the year, well, we aren't gonna drive by every week and count whether you have a cow out there. If you put your cow out there for a week and then sell it and say, here's my $1,500, I was grazing on this property, well, that's really not solving any issue.
And it seems to me like, you know, on 10 acres, unless you have lakefront property in Kalispell, Butthead, I can't see where most people are gonna go through that kind of effort to save a few $100 on 10 acres. I mean, generally, the cost differential in your taxes is not that great.
In probably 50 of the counties anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a few of those counties that might be a little different, like yours might be one of them.
Especially if you can't get your 1 acre home site on tax status.
Yeah,
Then it would be worth.
right. So,
But at that point, you're also, I mean, you're committing fraud.
right,
There's a lot more
we
things.
see that
Well,
That
occasionally.
hasn't stuck
Yeah.
a lot of people.
And I think you'd get away from the people that are faking you out if you did have that first acre at market value regardless,
Right, 'cause that's where the
because,
dollars are at.
because that's where the dollars are at, and then even if they got agricultural status, if they only got, you know, a $20,000 break instead of $2 million break, they might care less that they're 20,000 market value break, not taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, that's a good point. You may have solved a whole bunch of the trouble. It still hasn't, that's problem A. That at least I think we're committed to work on. Problem B is, do we limit problem B to, and this is a question, to grazing land? Or can we do that? I mean, solving problem B, because I think we've all agreed that if you're a farmer, you're probably farming. And that doesn't seem to be the issue that raised these bills at the legislature, that actually got us all in this room, right? I think you guys hit it on the head. It's grasslands that, and scattered timber, what have you, in some of these counties.
Because truly the grassland, if you're over 160 and you're not really doing anything else, you're considered grazing. So
Right.
that's the default agricultural classification.
Right.
So for the properties like in Fergus County and the one in Petroleum County, I mean, those bigger properties that may not be in production agriculture, do they qualify for a grazing rate? And if we said, okay, no more automatic, then what do they qualify as?
Then they'd have to apply for us and tell us what they're using it for. They may have a hay field out there that now we're gonna classify part of it as hay, it could be irrigated, it could be, and the remainder could be grazing, but they're gonna have to help us identify what exactly is going on in their fields.
But they shouldn't have an automatic qualifier as grazing land either,
No.
if they're
not grazing.
not grazing, yeah.
So is there a recreational?
We
There
don't
isn't.
have one. It'd take it, I'm assuming,
And
I
that,
didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, that's fine. I mean, that was where I'm going, you know, that we need to have some kind of, you gotta call it something.
Yeah, right now it'd revert to tract land,
Yeah,
Right.
right? If we
And-
did away
and-
with that, it'd be one big home site.
yeah.
Which might be, I mean, that might be too big. I guess I don't know what the differential would be, but it seemed like recreational on 10,000 acres might be a
More
different
appropriate.
tax, a more appropriate tax rate than tract land of 10,000 acres.
Right, and we could easily, I mean, legislatively, that'd be easy to say, all right, if you're not grazing land and you're not tract land, your
It's
X and your
recreation.
tax rate is
Yeah.
Y.
Mhm.
That's easy math, or not math, that's easy drafting, right?
Right.
Creating another class, which I'm
I'm
sure
just
everybody
thinking
loves.
of all.
Mr. Story would like that, the 17th classification.
Yeah, exactly. We'll throw them a
We're gonna get
bone,
rid-
we'll get rid of
We're
one
gonna get
other.
rid of non-qual and
Yeah.
and add recreation.
Yeah, it's a
There you
net
go.
zero.
Yeah. Mhm.
So, I mean, but now the question is, go ahead.
No, what? Finish your thought.
Don't mind, they never really stop. They just kind of go in a circle. Can we do that with just grazing without making a big mess of the system with the other, so we get rid of non-qual. We say if you're a farmer, we think you're a farmer, you just farm away, but by God, we're gonna check on these cowboys, these alleged cowboys. Can we do that?
You gotta check on everybody.
I think you'd have to make everyone apply still.
Yes,
Okay.
at least at the beginning, and then create some kind of mechanism like Chuck suggested a meeting or so ago, you know, some kind of affirmation or a test. And with the statement that they're gonna be subject to random audit, you know, because we have to keep people honest. And it's not that we don't think that farmers and ranchers aren't generally honest people. It's just that you can't treat people inequitably when it comes to property taxes. They've all got to be on the same page.
Well, and wouldn't it fall into that same category if somebody came in and bought up, you know, what's been traditionally farmland and just shut it down and either just let it go or put it back to grasslands and not do anything with it? You know, there still needs to be, you know, if we start with saying, well, it's farmland, so we're never gonna look at it, I think attesting that, yes, that's what I'm doing, and some definition of what farmland looks like. Seems to be my thing.
I think Ross's point is good there. You know, you do have some of these riverfront farms that get bought up by people who want to plant them to duck, you know, use them for bird hunting and, you know, waterfowl hunting. And so they put crop plots out and things like that, you know, provide feed and stuff, but they're really not producing, at least on a portion of it, commodities for sale. But I think you get back to your income tax, your Form F, you know, once you get approved as ag, and then if you have a Form F, you can pretty much prove that you're spending money on fertilizer and seed and chemicals and fencing materials and whatever else is out there.
So what I just think I heard, I was trying to simplify this and it didn't make it any simpler, did it? I mean, we do away with the non-qual. We just say you gotta prove you're a farmer or a cowboy. We create another class for the guy or gal who does not qualify to be a cowboy or a farmer. Now we gotta come up with the criteria. Is it just a flat dollar? Again, we're back to the flat dollar thing, whether you're farming or cowboying. Go ahead.
How do I qualify for this class, this new class that you're adding?
You're not a farmer or a cowboy. You're an out-of-town rich guy that just likes elk.
Is it based on the number of acres I own?
Nope, it
What's
could
my
be,
criteria?
So wouldn't you just be a residential property?
Yeah.
well,
like-
unless you run into these, you know,
Like me,
So
that has
then-
5 acres?
right, but what do you do with a couple of these properties that may or may not exist out there that might be 25,000 acres? You don't wanna qualify that as a home site and break it into 1 acre.
Well, that's an incentive to go ag.
Might be one hell of an incentive.
It's that's what we're trying to do though.
Right,
We're trying
but
to
I mean,
incentivize.
that's probably look pretty punitive.
Yeah, it would.
Right, because it'd be obnoxious. Can you imagine?
So you raise that land size, I mean, we do away with the 160 more or less, because everything, we do away with that. But to qualify for recreational, you gotta be a section or bigger.
But what do you do with everything in the middle that doesn't do anything?
Right,
Then they're gonna
It's
pay
tract land.
tract land,
Crackland?
and maybe sections too big, but
yeah, just because there's gonna be a bunch of that kind of stuff. And it
Eastern
doesn't-
Montana section doesn't seem that big, right?
Yeah. Ah,
But
Well,
I
I
mean, is
think-
that where we should go with this? Go ahead, Bob, I'm sorry.
Well, I think, you know, how do you differentiate it? So is it that you, I mean, I think you're right, going to market value on those tracks, you know, how many millions of dollars that it might be compared to what the productive value was might be a stretch, but maybe it's works sort of like non-qual does. It's some multiple of the tax rate or for ag or some multiple of the productive value or something like that, you know, and you, I mean, that's gonna be I guess it's harder thing to figure out is how you value that and how you tax rate it, you know. If you do both or do one or the other to when you create this, if you create this new class, whatever it might be, and that might be where all your non-qualified, it just becomes non-qualified ag land, you know? It's not up to 160 now, it's everything over that is non-qualified and yet it has its own rate and its own valuation system. It may or may not be market value.
Well, here's one, and I'm not advocating for this, I just wandered into it. What if you are, suddenly you're not a cowboy and you're not a farmer, but you have X thousand acres? The Department of Revenue values it at market value. We do have statistics and RTCs and everything else on farms and ranches that trade hands.
We'd have to change the law, the RTC law right now exempts agricultural property from recording a sales price, so it's gonna take time.
Real estate transfer certificate.
Okay.
So it's gonna take time to build up that sale database to value those size of acres.
Well, I tell you, that'll add some value in a couple of counties. If you, and I'm not saying this is a good idea, but you'd have to come up with how to value this property that's no longer getting the agricultural productivity valuation model. I don't think it's really cool to take however many thousand acres and break them down into 1 acre tract and say each one of these things is worth $4,000 an acre. That doesn't seem quite fair either.
So
what do you do?
systematically, what would generally happen if we were to classify all these as tract land or market land is each parcel, depending upon its size, some of them could be 640, 160, 320, whatever your parcel size is, that it would be 1 acre. Systematically, 1 acre would get the highest value, and then the residual acres would be a factor of that first acre value. So, you know, that's how each individual parcel would be. We wouldn't be taking the 20 parcels that owner has and throwing one value on it. We'd be valuing each individual parcel, and each individual parcel would have a higher first acre, and the residual acres would be at a lesser value.
Why is that?
Yeah.
So that's just systematically, if we were to do away with it, we wanted the system to calculate everything for us, that's how it would naturally calculate it.
So that'd be the cheapest way to do it for us.
Right.
Maybe not the most accurate valuation.
So if I sold a parcel for $1 million, but it was only 19 acres, then the first acre would get a $750,000 value, and the subsequent 18 acres would share all the rest, or something like that.
And that's
Something like that is how it works.
We use sales, we honestly do use sales to figure out like how much a buyer is willing to pay for additional acreage after the first, because that first acre is going to hold your well, your septic, your house, etc. Where that additional acreage is usually like a buffer between you and your neighbor or something else. So it's like that 1 acre is going to hold the house and whatever that house needs to support the house and the infrastructure.
Even if
That's kind of
we're,
where that
so
comes
so
from.
we're talking about large tracts of land, though, 20,000, 50,000 acres. And you may have 58 parcels within that 50,000 acres. And they're each gonna be assigned a 1 acre,
It's
like,
all have
potential
houses
home
on
site?
them.
No, they don't.
Well, and if they don't, still the valuation models, the way they
Still goes the
work.
same way no matter what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Since they're all
Now,
like-
we could create valuation models that say the first 10 acres is worth this amount, or the first 25 acres, and make a larger base acre size.
Mhm.
You know, we could monkey with the models,
Yeah.
but we're gonna need
Not that it really
sales in
matters.
order
Yeah.
to get any
As
kind of
long as it's
valuation
The
accurate.
same for everybody, it wouldn't really matter.
Right.
would it?
So back to that, if they have 58 parcels, are you gonna literally tax them for that initial, like the house envelope, the house site, whether it's an acre, 10 acres, or whatever it is, as if they're at that rate and then everything else is a percentage of it? Or you're just saying that's the value and now the entire, if there's no house on it, there's no improvements on it, then the entire parcel will just be at whatever that percentage of.
So all tract land, that's how it gets valued. We have a
Okay.
base size, and then a base rate, and then a residual rate that is something less than what that base rate is. And so depending if it's a 7,000 square foot lot, or if it's a 2 acre, 5 acre parcel, that first acre gets valued at X amount, or the 7,000 square feet gets valued at X amount, and then the remainder acres gets an adjustment. they're from. That's how the models currently work.
Okay.
So if we wanted to do something different on this particular land, we'd have to create a different valuation piece that could say this is large acre tract, there is no 1 acre breakout, it's all residual land, which we could do that as well.
And we usually, like, we can look at an area and say, what is the typical, we call them base size, what is the typical base size for this area? So if you're in rural Montana and the typical base size or base lot is 40 acres, we could say that that base size or base lot is 40 acres, and maybe that's worth $20,000. So that parcel would be worth $20,000, regardless of if it has a house on it or not. It would be $20,000 for that land with that new methodology. Because that's how we value everything else currently, that is in agriculture.
Yeah.
So what about the 1 acre under the house then, though? Is that segregated from that base parcel?
That is the base.
Or is that, or, so,
That is the base.
so instead of 1 acre, you have 40 acres essentially?
Yeah, okay.
But
I don't know if you need to do that.
Yeah,
Seems like the 1 acre, that's what you do on everything now, right?
right, yeah, makes sense.
I
to
don't
just
think you
do-
need to come up with multiple different measurement methods,
I
unless you
agree.
guys like that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Not particularly.
That's based on the idea that people pay a premium for the first acre. When you're buying land, that, there's an implicit assumption in these models that you're gonna put a house on that land. And so for these large tracts, that's maybe not true. That maybe it's just an open space of land, and so we wouldn't necessarily want to value it as if they were gonna build a house on it, I think is what we're talking about.
yeah, I'm with Dylan on that. Then the question is, how do you do it? Let's, Amanda had her hand up a minute ago, and then we'll get to Mark. Go ahead, Amanda.
This was just more of a thought, doing all this research on non-fault for you guys and like the open space and all that stuff. One thing I keep hearing is that we want to encourage people to be involved by ag. But what happens to the guy that just bought 3,000 acres and goes, I don't want to do ag, I'm gonna subdivide and sell. And now you just depleted that open space.
Yep.
The tax
You-
goes up.
You can't control people's behavior, but what, we wanna make sure that whatever we do doesn't discourage production
Right.
agriculture.
I just,
But
it
as
was
far
just
as
a thought that
personal
was rolling around,
choice,
like, well,
yeah, but
what's gonna prevent them from selling off to like a
not a
20
thing,
acre and chunk it
not
down to
a
one
thing,
and get
not a
rid of
thing.
it?
But that happens all the time, in Gallatin Valley and the Missoula Valley and the Flathead Valley, you know, I mean, that happens. People are in the land buying business just for speculation.
And I would say that the model there is that the guy's got 3,000 acres and he goes, oh, I'm gonna have to pay more for it, so I'm gonna chop it up and sell it. Or I can lease it out to somebody and get the ag rates.
Yep.
And if they really don't, cause if their interest is actually chopping it up and making money, they're gonna do it anyway.
Right.
And if they really don't want to, they really wanna maintain this big space, the incentive is to put it back into production, which is our intent.
Exactly.
Well said.
So back to the way you value this, I'm still wondering if the may not be the easiest, but if we're gonna say, all right, ag is valued on its productivity value, we've just concluded that this outfit did not qualify because,
He's not using it in an ag
right,
way.
right. Well, every other property, virtually every other property taxed in the state of Montana is taxed at its market value, which is defined as what a willing buyer would pay a willing seller, neither under any duress, right? Would you not, and I'm not saying it's the best idea, but why would you say this isn't market value? And say, well, all right, Beatty sold his place for $2,000 an acre and the guy next door didn't qualify. He's got 10,000 acres. We know what it's worth. We know what sagebrush and rattlesnakes in Petroleum County are worth because Beatty just sold his. Why wouldn't we appraise something that isn't given a productive value, a different definition of market value? A true market value.
So is that different than tract land?
No,
That's how you
it's
track-
treating it just like tract
tract
land,
land,
except it wouldn't be on an
tract-
acre. It's
yeah,
like, all
except-
right,
Right, and tract land really, by and large, would be much higher in its value because you went and broke it up into tract land.
right.
Right, and this is, so, yeah,
Right.
I think that's legitimate. I think the big point is like, what's the jump? Are you going from paying this dollar amount to this dollar amount, or is it somewhere in between?
Well,
What
you
does it
know,
look like?
Well, let's take,
It depends on where you're at. If you're in Gallatin Valley, it's gonna be huge. If you're in the eastern part of the state, it's maybe not.
And of course, it goes back to the incentive, which is to get people back to producing on it if they're not gonna.
Absolutely, that would be a good incentive in the Gallatin Valley.
I still think you would need
it.
my neighbor, well, you know the place, right to the north of me, just sold, and it's 9,000 deeded acres of sagebrush and rattlesnakes off Kelly Road. Sold for $3 million. If my place, if I turned, yeah. If there is a comparable sale, if their neighbor, i.e. me, decided that, or if I couldn't meet the qualifications, well, we got a pretty good idea of what my sagebrush and rattlesnakes is worth, right? That's market value.
I think you'd still need to have a size thing, because if we're not careful, we eliminate non-qual. My 21 acre parcel I can apply for, if I don't get it, should my 21 acres go to tract land? Like my 19 acre neighbor? Or do I get this funny classification? So I still think you'd have to have a size barrier before you start creating this different valuation piece. Because otherwise you're not fixing the non-qual problem that we're trying to fix.
Right.
And are there enough comparable sales to be scientifically vetted?
Not yet,
On the bigger tracts.
Yeah.
because the egg, you know, Beatty sold his right now, he doesn't have to report that sale price. We'd have to change the statute that says, I don't care, you still have to report your sale price if you're egg land. Then we'd be gathering those sales of large acre, multiple parcel sales to be able to build models off of.
Right, so you could do it.
So it's gonna take a little bit of time to build that database, so we wouldn't be able to implement this in 2027, perhaps even. It might have to be or slowly.
Would we want that as a separate bill though? That reporting of sale prices?
Yes.
Yeah,
I think so.
but
Yes.
here's my question for everybody is, honest to God, market value the right value to place on recreational ranches?
My instinct would be is you listen to people in every part of this, you know, the natives that have been here for a while, grousing about the people coming and buying it. And my property values all went up because this guy paid $1,000 an acre for something that doesn't produce $100 an acre, right? That's the complaint. So it really does come down, and they always say, well, people should be taxed on what they paid for it. So I think that fits in that, in my view, is that if you're willing to come in and pay that kind of dollars and not put it to use, then that's probably a legitimate base to put it on.
I don't intellectually have a problem with that, because market value is how we value everything except that. 100% of what we think this thing itself will.
We need a bill for that.
So
Yeah,
let me throw a wrench in it for you.
go ahead.
We proposed a policy, Montana Farm Bureau, brought a policy and the delegate body adopted it early in the 2000s, that conservation easements be taxed at the value of the right. And Department of Revenue at that time, totally different administration, said we couldn't possibly do that because we don't know what the value of it is. Which we said that's bull, because you know what you paid for it. So it had a market value. It had a value. But Revenue at that time was very insistent that they didn't know the value of that right.
I'm not sure.
But if
Conservation
it were egg land when it sold, that may not have been disclosed to us.
Yeah.
So we might not know what that sale price is, because at the time it wasn't required, and it's still not required today
Right.
without a change in that
So the requirement
statute.
for disclosing what you pay for a piece of property
Would have
would
to
solve that
change.
problem.
Right,
Yes,
yeah,
that
right
would
now
solve
it's just
it,
limited
yes.
to residential.
Right. I'm just thinking about all of the conservation easements that exist out there, where somebody else truly holds the development rights to a piece of property. And that's something that we're not capturing, the value of that right.
We're not.
When I exercise my mineral rights, I'm taxed on that exercising. But whoever holds a conservation easement, who exercises it daily, never has to pay a tax on that right.
That's correct. And what they said was correct though, because under the laws as it stood then and now, you're not
They didn't have
required to disclose
disclose the
that,
price.
right?
Right.
The RTC requires you to disclose your residential, because that's where we get all the numbers that go into this.
Yeah.
And commercial,
thing.
I mean,
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
there's
you're right.
certain requirements that are exempted from reporting sale price, and agricultural land is one of them.
Right.
So how are ranch appraisals done without having that value before?
Apparently,
Yes.
from what I understand, ranch appraisals are a little bit tricky because they have to use MLS information, multiple listing, because they can't, well, they wouldn't get any information from us anyway, but they have to use what their knowledge of ranch lands that have sold, that other realtors and or appraisers have used.
So
So
you,
you're talking about a fee appraisal, like if you
Yeah.
went out to
Yeah,
appraise your
yeah.
place for estate purposes.
yeah, we've, done that and then they come up with a figure and this is.
Yeah.
But if they don't have that knowledge,
Well, maybe the
Well, they get a different
realtors are
database.
Yeah.
exchanging that information with each other, it's just that the Department of Revenue.
Right.
isn't
Yeah.
privy to that.
Yeah.
It still exists out there. It's being reported by somebody, but it's not being shared.
sure,
So that's how if we went the route of saying, all right, hey, if you're not gonna meet these qualifications, you're at 100% of market value, which is what this place would sell for. We would have to have the ability to get the information, which would have to be through the RTC deal. And it'd take a while to build the database enough for us to be able to do a legitimate appraisal of, a ranch in Petroleum County. They don't change hands that often, right? Or Fergus County for that matter.
Is there a set number that you place on, like a percentage? Like, if you're gonna tax something on the market value, does it really depend on the taxing jurisdiction, what that percentage is? Or is there like just a flat percentage? So if I have an acre of land and the market value was $50,000, and we put this rule into place that it's 100% of market value, would I be taxed on $50,000 every year until?
No, you would be taxed. We would have, the royal we would have to establish a tax rate for this new
Okay,
parcel. And so if you've got a $1 million cowboy farm, it would be, and we valued it at 1 million, it'd be the 1 million times the tax rate
okay,
would arrive at the taxable value.
Okay.
And that taxable value, of course, then
Gets
goes to the
applied to the
county and
mills.
gets applied, and the
Okay.
mills get applied to that.
right.
So what we would have to do if we're gonna go down this route is decide, A, that we wanna think this should be assessed at 100% of market value. B, what we think a legitimate tax rate should be.
Mhm.
And see how we get the market value of this thing, right?
Yeah,
It gets complex, but that's really if we're gonna do something.
we're not talking about 50,000 pieces of property. We're probably talking more like 50 pieces of property. Think,
I don't know.
I think there's more than you think.
really?
No, because if you get rid of
You get with
non-qualified,
non-qualified,
there's
yeah.
probably
Oh, well.
50 in Helena,
Yeah, there's a lot of small.
like
small
20
ones.
20
20
acre
acre
parcels.
parcels.
Get that map.
Yeah, that
We had
was-
that last bill, was it 40,000 parcels?
Something like that,
47,000.
47,000?
What was, what were you telling me, Cindy, tell these guys about the 21% of
Oh.
residential?
Well, Brendan knows, yeah, but
But I wonder if they have information on how
Trevor,
many.
maybe, wasn't it,
It's more than
I
five,
mean,
but it's still kind of the size limit. I mean, if you're.
in the property tax working group, wasn't it 20 or 21% of all the property tax bills go to someone out of state?
No, it was 22% of
You know, when you
the
start talking
total market value in Montana.
Mhm.
Oh,
When it gets bills sent, and a whole bunch of that's Madison County,
Okay, gets set up, oh, just 20% of the
of
market,
the total market
market
value,
value.
which is actually a huge amount of money
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, big.
when you
Way
think
big.
about it.
Okay, I thought it was
Not of
Of
the
taxpayers.
properties.
Oh,
No, no,
okay.
it's, that was a
Just
percentage of the total
market
market
value.
value.
Okay, okay.
But
That's still a lot.
you're gonna
Yeah.
start, if like Helena, for example,
That could-
let's say there's
It could be more than that.
2,000 parcels that are non-qualified ag right now. And say half of them qualify and they stay, the other half are gonna be taxed at a higher value. But you're not changing your tax, your total tax in the county, you're just
No,
redistributing. it.
Redistributing, correct.
Where
Right.
the guy that's in the valley that has,
Unless the state don't float its mills.
Why, Bob? That's on you.
Go Bob, go.
Thanks, Bob.
You gotta get that in every meeting.
The thing I wanted to get in is that, you know, I don't disagree with going down this road, but the thing you always have to worry about is protecting the state's concept of using productive value on ag land. And once you start taking some of the ag land out of that system and putting it into another system, you have to do it in a way that at least is legally defensible. So when the rich guy that can hire the lawyers comes in and says, you know, you treat me unfairly. If you're going to do market value on me, you got to do market value on every parcel in the state, and then ag's in real trouble. So that's just a caution.
And there's a couple of things to say here on that. One, having done most of the constitutional due process cases in the last 25 years I was practicing law here, you know, legislature has a great deal of deference and ability to classify and apply tax rates specific properties. I mean, that's well recognized. Bob, you're right. There can always be something crazy go on, but that's a pretty well recognized right by the courts that the legislature has the ability to classify and tax property how it sees fit, as long as it's not picking on similarly situated taxpayers and treating them differently. So I can't treat John different than Cindy because they're both ag properties, but I can treat John different than Robin's house in Central Billings. So that piece I don't worry too much about while we're going here. Otherwise, everything would have to be all the same, right? The other piece I was a little stumbling over is just, we were talking about there's somewhere between 35,000 and 45,000 non-qualified ag parcels right now in Montana. So it is a pretty good sized lift on non-qual parcels. Probably half or something would probably qualify anyway under whatever numbers we do. And I have no idea, depending on what we did, the impact this would be on larger parcels, right? I don't know how many people would fall into a new appraisal.
Will fit into the rotunda.
Well, we can have them on the stairways and out on the front too, so.
So what's your take on this? Are we going the wrong direction? We're just talking about ideas, but is this crazy or?
No, this is going in a direction that's extremely, has been called for quite a lot over the past, I don't know, 3 sessions at least. And what I would say is this would be going toward also mitigation of property taxes. Because we're seeing such a pressure on the residential property taxes. We have to be able to identify where we can generate more fairly additional tax revenues for the state of Montana and local governments. That I think this is definitely going in the right direction. And just want to say, we've got till the end of June to have draft recommendations to revenue interim.
And I just want to follow on that to say too, that it really isn't necessarily additional revenue, it's just better redistribution. Taking some of the weight off the residential and people that are really getting hit hard. And, you know, oftentimes it's that complaint statewide where we have wealthy folks coming in, buying up property, and people feel like they're not pitching in their fair share. Well, this is a way of mitigating that activity. And from the point of, you know, local communities, you know, you could justify ag rates on property taxes because those people are spending most of their money in town buying inputs. And so the money gets distributed, you know, I mean, it's because there isn't a big profit margin in most ag productions. This kind of helps offset that a little bit by saying everybody gets a little bit of a break if the people buy it up and take it out of production. Now they're picking up a larger share of that property tax bite to make up for the fact that they're not inputting as much in the local community.
But something I just thought of as you were saying that Ross, that actually is making me think where we're going makes some sense too. If you were actually to say these properties that don't qualify are subject to whatever tax rate at 100% of their market value, boy, you want to talk about an incentive to lease your place and keep it in ag. Because you will have, it would, depending on what your tax rate was, it could be a big ticket item in a few of these places.
Well, I can tell you, there's a number of, smaller operators that operate primarily off of leased property with their cattle operations that have talked to me about the number of cows that are no longer on the Snowy Mountains. And it's huge. And so then you walk right into town and you talk to the, feed salesman, the equipment salesman, the stockyards, the whole thing. It has a major impact. And if all we do is just, maybe it doesn't change anything. Everybody with these properties go, okay, let's put some cattle on the land. And they start doing that. We're gonna end up with, number one, better range management. I mean, all the benefits of actually producing and utilizing our land appropriately comes into play. And it helps in our local communities and all those families that get jobs and so on. So I mean, I feel like maybe it ends up being a zero-sum game as far as, doesn't change a lot because these trophy ranches decide maybe it is worth keeping them in production. And to me, that's a win.
And one more thing that we should keep our eye on is we have a couple of forestry related operations that are closing in the state of Montana. And a lot of our ag producers augment some of their income by harvesting timber and selling it to the lumber mills. And we're losing that. So it is gonna have an effect one way or another. And to make it more of an incentive for what we're doing here, or does this push people over the edge? Something that we should really keep our eyes on.
Well said. Go ahead, Mark.
One thing I would suggest is when we go through this and we figure it out, is if there's a way to separate some of these issues that can solve all the problems, but maybe it's 3 separate issues that 2 of them make it through, or 1 of them makes it through, rather than just dumping it all in a pot and going, nope, nothing happened.
Yeah.
That's wise.
I was wondering if we shouldn't circle back to Jared and see if there, in light of our conversation, is the rest of your presentation pertinent?
Sorry, Jared.
But we could go to maybe the last slide. Probably. You want to go back to talk about income requirements again? Actually, Bryce, can you just pull up this spreadsheet?
A tool.
So if you want to talk about the effects that changing the income requirement might have to your property or someone you represent, you can put the specific acreage of each land use into this spreadsheet up here, and it'll estimate what your income and income per acre would be based on that parcel and the land makeup of your land. So this example I have up here, and I think it's the same in the slide, yeah. So this parcel, that data parcel, that has 100 acres of grazing land, 20 acres of irrigated land, 20 acres of summer fallow, and then a 1 acre home site, 141 total acres, $10,057 of total income, or $71 per acre. You can see how each land use contributes to that total income, right? So I don't know, Bryce, you put in just put in like an 80 acre grazing and 0 everything else, and you can kind of see part of the problem that they might have. This is based off of the average productivity statewide of grazing land. They only produce $1,000 of income. So most 80 acre grazing land parcels wouldn't meet the $1,500 income requirement, right? They could meet the $10 an acre income requirement, but not $1,500 total income, right? So just a tool that you can throw in any acreage of any type of land use and kind of see what income requirements that parcel could meet, right? This is the average productivity of each of those land uses, yeah. statewide average productivity. So if your land is better or worse, then your numbers will be higher or lower than what's that's out. That's pretty much all I have with this hard But I'd also like to remind you that about half of the states, similar to Montana, that I've looked into, have an income requirement. Half of them don't even have an income requirement, so that's something to consider too. Also, Oregon is the only state that has any sort of per acre income requirement. So if we institute that, it would be, you know, a little out of step with other states. And also Oregon has a minimum and a maximum. So I think 5 acres, you have to have $500 of income. Up to 30 acres is $100 per acre, and then anything over 30 has to have $3,000 of income. That floor and a ceiling, and have a per acre requirement in the middle. So,
That kind of covers the problem you were talking about.
yeah, so that's
Sliding.
some problems with huge parcels, and if you want the absolute minimum, you could set something like that. So no state just has a straight per acre income, no matter how big or small your parcel is, so something to consider.
Well, you sure took a long time explaining all that.
So are we potentially looking at 4 different bill drafts? And if we are, is it possible for our next meeting to just have a rough outline of here are the components of bill draft A, B, C, and D? So that we can take a look at each of them somewhat in isolation.
I think that's what we
Yes,
should.
but let's make sure that staff knows which ones you're going for. Are we considering the all lands first acre at market value?
I would think so.
Okay, are we considering completely eliminating non-qual? Okay, and then how do you, the over 160 that seems to be a grazing problem, I mean, we want applications for all, so that's a piece of it. But then is there, what's in your mind about how we address the fact that the problem truly is that default grazing classification? How would that bill draft even look? What are we considering?
Well, are we talking about like an AUM and dollar kind of like we're doing on the non-qual now?
That's what I'm wondering, is it, do we stick with the all apply? Do we stick with the $1,500? Do we have some sort of a tier? It's $1,500 up to 160. Is it something higher than that, over 160? Is it, I mean, do you want some sort of a tiered income requirement?
I think maybe the Oregon method, right, where there's a bottom and a top and a incremental as it goes along, and then that allows you to kind of tweak that to come up with something that seems within grasp of anybody trying to be an ag.
Because if you make it 1,500, everybody over.
Right.
Everybody qualifies automatically.
Right, or it's so easy to qualify. The exceptions follow the rule.
And then there's a component where we're gonna need to, or a bill to, make public the sale price.
Yes.
Well, that would be a multi-piece bill. The first would be your RTC would have to be, it's confidential, but you'd have to disclose your value on your
And
RTC.
essentially, we'd just be eliminating the exemption of agricultural properties not having to report. That's an
That's
easy bill
simple.
draft.
That's easy.
Sounds simple.
Yeah.
What was the rationale in not having to report?
Privacy.
Well, yeah, but if I sold my house, what if I didn't want to tell anybody what I sold my house for?
It's still private.
But it's reported.
My guess is that because we use those sale prices to create a market value for lands, and egg land isn't at a market value currently, is likely why that it got excluded. But Bonnie, do you have any other?
That's what I understand. We did not have any use for that data because of the way the ag valuation is currently set. So there was no reason to gather that data.
We don't use comparable sales for ag land. Real residential We
They
did,
do.
so that's why that was in there. And it was, man, that was tough getting that through when it did.
So because ag land is taxed at the productive value, that's why you didn't worry about the market value.
Correct, the sales, yeah,
Alright.
sales.
And I think it'd be fairly easy to create those income tiered approach, because even with this flat income requirement that we're seeing here, at the $1,500, it only takes 19 acres of wild hay and less than that for the other commodities that aren't grazing to qualify. So I think a tiered approach could be easily adopted.
Would you still depend on just 3 commodities though? Or would you, because Montana's agricultural landscape has changed so much in the last 40 years, would you consider adding 1 or 2?
So Cindy, there's a difference here between the eligibility requirements and the valuation. And eligibility on the ag side, forgetting grazing, for everything else, the producer gives the receipts for whatever crop they're growing. But the valuation side is only for those 3 crops. So when we were talking about this dollar amount per acre using, we were dropping back to what we use for our valuation.
Okay.
And we don't have data for all the crops in the state.
Okay, I think we have a 5th bill too.
Well, and that, it's the
We were-
tax rate and the,
Recreational plus.
yeah.
What's
Yeah,
the
because
new-
we're going to
the fall?
eliminate non-qual.
So.
But I think didn't we decide not to do a recreation because we're just gonna go with value?
Market value,
Well,
Market
we'd have to
value, which is
define
same
it
as
right.
track line.
yeah.
Have to call it something. you mean?
Yeah,
What is it gonna be if it's not non-qual, then what is it?
it's,
It's either ag or market value.
we'd have to create a class. for it
We would,
probably.
because right now we have residential track land and commercial track land, industrial track land, or
Recreational
non-qual, or ag, or forest.
So we need to call it rec then or something? or-
Probably.
I think,
It seems that that might be an easier sell when you're talking about marketing this, saying, look, these people are buying up these ranches for toys. Defining it as recreational,
I would love to hear the lobbyists come in against that one and try to oppose the
Recreational.
bill.
yeah.
My question is, what size is that?
Well, I got shut down with the section, so.
Well, but if it's not agriculture and and you put a size limit on it that's pretty big, then what is everything else?
It'd be an
It'd be
acre.
residential, commercial, industrial, so anything
so you-
under this magical
Magic
size
number,
would be
yeah.
considered residential if it's vacant.
Yeah.
So-
And it's
you
not
could-
being used in another way.
And you could have 161 acre recreational property, right?
Sure.
You could have a 40-acre recreational.
Right, but
property.
then it becomes
But why wouldn't the
house
40?
tract or something, right?
Yeah, why wouldn't the 40 acre be residential?
Yeah.
Okay,
Again, one question I would ask on that, because of the way all the bills or all the legislation is written, is it by parcel size or ownership size? Contiguous ownership or non-contiguous?
Right.
Those are things that come up all the time in our ag qualifications. So are you talking just parcel or are you talking land within that one ownership under the same owner?
And I guess it would depend on if it were getting some kind of different treatment value wise or tax rate wise.
if I have, yeah, if I have 40 acres that I'm not doing anything with except go duck hunting twice a year, that should probably be recreational property. But if I were smart, I would lease it to my neighbor to graze his goats, you know,
For $1,500.
absolutely, absolutely.
Well, there you go.
Well, at least your neighbor's goats got something.
Exactly, and it's in production agriculture,
Right.
so it just depends what you do with it, I guess.
And it goes with.
And I guess that is the question. Is it going to get a different tax rates than what residential would be? Is it going to get a different valuation method than our current valuation pieces are? For residential, commercial, is it gonna be valued differently?
You're
Because then I
you're
think-
talking about non-ag. It didn't qualify for ag, so now what are we doing with it?
Right.
Well, I thought the discussion was it's whatever the value of it was, because if you got 10,000 acres and somebody paid $1,000 an acre for it, that's the value that you base it
But then
on.
a lower tax rate because it's bigger.
You can own your class 4.
It could still be class 4.
3%, whereas non-qual is
I think it's
15.
class 4.
It's 7 times the ag
Yeah,
rate, so it's
so-
under the ag classification.
Right, so non-qual
non-qual.
currently is at 15.something%. 12% tax rate, where residential is 1.35.
Yeah, I don't
So
understand.
you're paying full, if
just gonna tell you
you're
that.
valued on a 40-acre parcel at full market value, and you're looking at $550,000 worth of market value, would you rather pay 0.35% of that taxable value, or 15.12% of that taxable value?
Right.
Or is recreational some combination between residential and commercial, and do you create its own tax rate?
More expensive than residential?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You mean a
Well,
higher
that's a
tax rate than res?
disincentive.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Or do you just give it the residential tax rate and call it good?
Which I don't care.
Well,
Let
why
somebody
don't you-
amend it in committee.
You know, part of that, part of that comes down to what's it gonna cost? I mean, you know, it'd be nice to look at that and say, well, if we do it because residential is 1.35.
1.35, yeah,
Yeah, so that, and then what's commercial?
1.89.
1.89, and so maybe just have, say, this is what it'd be on 1,000 acres or something, and,
Well, that depends on jurisdiction, right?
well, true.
That's, so you can't really,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, if it was in Madison County, there's 200 mills. If it's in Petroleum County, it's 700 mills. There's a big difference on the same tax
But
rate.
Mills are different.
But
and
the mills are all
conversion
different,
of-
Petroleum County mills
Of
aren't worth
production to market
What's that?
values.
anything. Petroleum County
Right.
mills aren't worth anything.
That's what it feels like.
So Dylan, is there any, I mean, is there some supporting research you guys might be able to do around this to help us to, from a scoping standpoint? Like the idea that there's, whatever you said, Bryce, 37 or 47,000 non-qual tracks in the state, or, I mean, those sorts of data points might be helpful. Can you guys,
I've
for your
come up
notes,
with
come up with
some
some ideas?
estimates, like, sort of like a fiscal note of what eliminating non-qual and eliminating 160 plus auto qualification would do. We're a little unsure because we don't know for sure what those properties are worth market value. We have some vague estimates, but we have done some work on that. We can keep looking at
And
that.
would
We
they
can
be
apply different
treated-
tax rates to the taxable, or to the market values that we estimate that aren't great, but there's something.
Would that be
Mine-
newly,
Well-
I'm sorry, newly taxable property?
It's
Would
not
be
newly
treated.
taxed.
Change in class, Bryce, is newly taxable?
The first time it becomes class 4.
The first time it's a subdivision that results in new class 4. So this wouldn't meet the current definition of newly taxable unless it's actually subdivided and becoming class 4.
Yeah, that's something we probably want to make sure we wrote into this, is that it wasn't really taxable.
Right, because that could be a
Right.
That could make a mess.
good.
And it would be nice if we could go back to, again, those examples that were shown last time around with the disparities between properties that are alike. And say, okay, what would the impact of this legislation be on each of those? And would it achieve some degree of fairness and equalization?
And I think, wasn't that
Dylan's writing it down.
last time Eric did a non-qual property impacts that kind of showed what the change in value and the change in mills would be. So non-qual property estimate impacts from your packet from last meeting has some of that data in it.
That's some of the stuff that I put together. I just wasn't here last
Oh, Jared
time
did it.
to present it, but yeah, we have all that and we can adjust it. It's dynamic with the different tax rates and different market values and like that.
Good.
But we can get some.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Chuck.
I was just thinking back to last meeting, we had a lot of discussion about the definition of agriculture. And I think Senator Beard suggested maybe including some exclusions in there to say what agriculture is not. Does that need to be part of one of these bills as well?
I think you're probably right, and that could go in would you think that it fit into the bill of, got to apply to be ag, and this is ag? I'm just thinking out loud at you. That seems like that's a logical fit in one bill, doesn't it, legislators?
All lands first acre at market value, and then in all lands, you can go through and identify, define.
Well, in there would be
Definition of agriculture.
definition of
Yeah,
agriculture,
right.
which is another thing we talked about. So that could go in that piece of legislation. What do you guys think?
Yes.
Are
think
we
so.
changing the definition of agriculture? It exists in statute already.
Right, well, we had a few things that, like Chuck brought up, that of what agriculture is
It's
not,
not, yeah.
Right.
and we got those in notes
So
somewhere.
that could be an amendment to the current statute.
Yeah.
And I think that was based on some information that the lieutenant governor put together, that was the time we discussed what it is not.
Yeah,
Might have been.
so we can, I think that'd be in that kind of draft, it'd fit in there best, when we're saying what agriculture is, what agriculture isn't, how you get there. Makes sense?
So if I could step back, Robin, this is what I'm talking about with the like parcels and what the impact would be.
Yeah, there were a couple of pretty good pictures in that. That Big Sky one's a big deal.
When, just so I'm clear in my mind, when we talk about having an income qualification, is that true income that somebody receives? Or is that, you have 40 acres of alfalfa that you farm and feed your cows? Well, you're not gonna generate any revenue off of that because you're,
So we're still gonna wanna know how many tons of alfalfa you're getting, because then we can apply the commodity price to that alfalfa, and then the remainder has to meet the animal unit lots. So it still can qualify even if your own cows are using it, we just need to know how much.
Okay.
How much you're.
Yeah,
paying.
makes sense.
Yeah, but you actually
Yeah,
farmed
I
it.
just wanted to clarify.
Okay.
This is the fourth one?
Oh,
The 10 year.
I would like to have two more meetings. I'd like to have one in May and one the very early beginning of June, because we need to give this to revenue interim in June. And when's the meeting?
24th and 25th.
So I think we could have two more meetings. We could get these bill drafts done up for next meeting. And then we could have one more finalized before we present to revenue interim meeting early June. Does that sound okay?
Just so much fun.
I think we need two more. I think we just need at least two more.
See, we still have public comment, don't we?
Yes.
Who's running this show anyway? Is that you, Bill?
Not me. This is your monkey or your circus. I'm just a monkey here.
You're just one of the monkeys. Well, okay, do we have anybody that's here from the public that would like have anything to say? Behind me, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Mike Murphy. I'm the executive director for the Montana Water Resources Association. We also run some cattle. And I just wanted to make a statement from the standpoint of both personal and as far as the association's concerned. You know, I sat on the Ag Land Taxation Committee about 3 or 4 different times. We went through all of these same kind of gyrations and questions, concerns, comments. And overall, the question always came back to, what are we gonna do to chance for that young individual, beginning farmer, or an old timer, to be able to continue to be in agriculture and continue to make it and have an opportunity? And we always kind of come back to that same question with taxation. What are we doing? Whatever move we make, what impact are we gonna have on the potential for those individuals to stay in or to get into agriculture? And I'm always concerned when we start talking about a move away from production value. Because ultimately, as we move towards a market value, that market value will become the norm in agriculture over time, whether it's 10 years or 40 years. At some point, market value is gonna take over in regards to agriculture and ability. Once that's established, I don't think there's a way we can move it back from that, back to a production agriculture basis. And I've always believed that the production ag valuation is the process that has allowed agriculture to be, call it semi-productive from the standpoint of income, because ultimately it's a tough, as we talked. The difference between 1985 and the cattle prices 2 or 3 years ago was almost nothing. So if we look at those peaks and valleys in the marketing of grain, ag, livestock, and so forth, I don't think we're gonna see much different from the standpoint of where that $1,500 income threshold fits in regards to how that impacts the taxation process. I don't think we're gonna see a lot of difference there. And ultimately, I think that's gonna continue to be the case in agriculture. I would hope that our cap prices will hold where they are now, but I bet they won't. I'll bet 2 years or 3 years from now, we're looking at that, and, you know, coming over the edge. And ultimately, that's what worries me, is that in agriculture, Olympic averages and so forth are certainly very important, because we do throw out the highs and the lows. But ultimately, I'm concerned if we start trying to get away from production values, because ultimately that's where ag is at. And those young people trying to get into agriculture are gonna have a tough enough time as it is. You know, I think we're concerned about, you know, people taking something out of agriculture and using it for recreation or other activities. But ultimately, those activities, those big outfits, those places have got the resources to go out there and decide, well, what do we gotta do to make sure we continue to meet the requirements? It's the young, small operations that concern me. Those individuals don't have that same opportunity or ability, legal ability and so on and so forth, to get those decisions made and be able to meet those requirements. And once they've fallen out of that category, they won't be back into it. And I've always been a very much concerned parent or grandparent now, in that my kids and grandkids should have an opportunity to get into agriculture. And I want to make sure that whatever decisions comes out of this committee and ultimately through the legislature aren't going to have a negative impact on the ability of those kids to get involved and stay involved. And so I'm just throwing that out, because in hearing all the discussion, I've heard, I concur. It frustrates me when you see somebody out there taking ag out of ag, or ag land out of ag. I don't want to I want to make sure we don't throw out the baby with the bath. So that we've got the opportunity for those kids to stay in and get into agriculture. And ultimately, like I said, I think those big operations, they're going to have the ability to meet the requirements, to continue to meet the taxation requirements, to get what they need from that perspective. The younger, smaller outfits aren't going to be able to do that. So I think we just need to be real careful in that regard. You know, and the other thing I was going to mention too, from a conservation standpoint, smaller operation, for example, in my case, for example, we are very careful not to overutilize that range. Once you've done that, when you get to the point where you've diminished your ability in the long run. So from year to year, you may decide not to use ag. You may take 80 acres or 100 or 200 acres out of production, basically, entirely. And ultimately, your income per parcel may be down below this $1,500 threshold, so on and so forth. But I think we got to be really careful when we look at that too, that we don't diminish the incentive for an operator to continue to do the best conservation-related decisions that they can make. So again, I'm just throwing these all out there as my concern. Ultimately, that we make sure that the decisions that come out, go to the legislature, are the ones that are going to be in the best interest of that.
Thank you. Anybody else online, Bill?
Mr. Smith does have a comment he'd like to make, I believe.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
So I'm not sure how I should feel that you guys remember me that much, that I got mentioned half a dozen times during the meeting, but sorry I could not attend the last one. So as you guys were talking about removing non-qualified ag land and or the 160 acre requirements and the process of what it would be to then qualify going underneath the new one or still have the old one, because currently, as I've mentioned before, the AUM calculations for non-qualified or qualified has flaws throughout the statutes, the MSU table, and that 25 AUM minimum. As was just mentioned a few minutes ago, if it takes 19 acres of wild hay to meet your $1,500 income, but this magical table says that I have to have 25 AUMs, at a face value, that should take some looking at. That the AUM calculations are overly conservative and not based on all situations. Web soil survey data is an estimation and is not uniformly applied. Who in here has a 10-month grazing season? The 25% harvest efficiency factor. Where do you grow your buy your replacements. Tame pastures, rotation, pasture management, year-long grazing. I would encourage producers in the room to please pick one of your pastures, do the AUM calculations according to statutes, and see what you come up with as to what you are allowed to run if you're under 160 acres. When you get into bona fide ag production, legitimate producer, again, I'm happy and very glad that I got my property back into ag land tax status, because I spent all day Sunday out there putting clips on fence and stretching wire, because yearling heifers are not exactly the most intelligent critter come spring with my granddaughter. So how am I not involved in ag, regardless of an overly generalized and conservative computer exercise? So if we need to prove production, the process needs to be accurate and not an across the statewide model. I'll skip the shooting fluffy examples from the earlier bits of when we were talking, but as an ag producer, even though I'm small scale, right now I'm stuck to just selling the commodity. If I want to burger an old cow and sell burger at $5 a pound, why can't I do that and still have it qualified as ag income versus just selling the cow? You're currently forcing people to make stewardship decisions on anything under 160 acres. And the consideration of the 1 acre home site, it also goes both ways. My house is over 100 years old. I got 39 acres of pasture and a 1 acre homestead. When I got put into 39 acres of non-qualified ag in my house at market value, that's exactly why I had to go through the process, because my taxes went up $1,000. Applying uniformly across the state, there needs to be a better way to assess AUMs, the forage available, the type of forage available, changes in grazing systems, and what qualifies as information that can be presented to qualify as ag. But thank you guys, and I will see you again in May.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Well, just quickly, I guess I wasn't going to. If you see a resemblance on either end of the webcams here, that is my nephew. He's got irrigated ground. Actually, I've been following this because of the timberland classification. And whether or not class 10 has been included in discussion. So far, they haven't. So I keep reporting to I'm representing the Montana Forest Owners Association on this. So, but in my case, I have a combination. I have both class 10 and class 3, which is considered non-qual because of the amount that's in timberland. And it always seems kind of confusing to me as to why they've broken that up. So you might consider that as well, that in these mixes of various types of run cows on all of them. Not as many as you're talking about, because it doesn't have a dairy fat. So just kind of keep that in consideration as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Anybody else? I don't see anybody
Nobody
online.
online.
Shaking his head. Before we move to make our next plan, does anybody else have anything they want to add?